The hallways of Goldman Towers always smelled faintly of fresh coffee in the mornings and floor cleaner at night. Every evening, when most employees packed their laptops and hurried home, a tall, thin man in a faded blue uniform would quietly push his cleaning cart through the empty corridors. His name was Samuel Brooks, but most people didn't bother to remember it. To them, he was just the janitor. His back was always slightly bent, his steps slow but steady. His uniform had been washed so many times the color had faded, and his black shoes were worn at the edges. In the daytime, the building was filled with laughter, chatter, and the sound of heels clicking across marble floors. At night, the sound changed, the low hum of the vacuum, the soft squeak of a mop bucket's wheels, and the quiet sighs of a man who worked alone. Samuel never complained, never spoke much if anyone greeted him. He would give a polite nod and a small smile, but most people didn't bother. There were a few, though, who noticed him, not in a kind way. Some of the younger employees stayed late for overtime, and when they saw Samuel pass by with his cart, they would whisper jokes to each other. "Hey, mop man, missed a spot." One would call, another would grin and say, "Careful, or he might clean you away too." The group would burst into laughter, their voices echoing through the empty floor. Samuel never answered them. He kept his eyes down, pushing the mop slowly across the polished tiles. Sometimes his lips curved into a faint smile. Not because he found their jokes funny, but because he refused to let their words hurt him inside. Though there was a heaviness in his chest, a weight that had nothing to do with the mop in his hands. One winter evening, Emily, a young intern, stayed late to finish an urgent report. She was still typing at her desk when she heard the familiar sound of the mop bucket's wheels. Looking up, she saw Samuel pass by. Moving slowly, the overhead lights made his shadow stretch long across the floor. Emily noticed something unusual this time. For just a moment, Samuel stopped near the big glass window that looked out over the city. He set his mop against the wall and reached into his pocket. Emily's eyes narrowed in curiosity. Samuel pulled out a small object, round, shiny, catching the faint light. It looked like a medal. He held it gently, as if it were made of glass, staring at it with an expression Emily couldn't read. Was it sadness? Was it pride? Maybe both. After a few seconds, he slipped it back into his pocket and went back to work. Emily wanted to ask, but something stopped her instead. She kept watching him as he moved further down the hall. The young men who usually mocked him were gone tonight. The air felt quieter without their laughter. Yet Emily could still remember their voices and how Samuel never fought back. It made her wonder why. She had only been at the company for 2 months, but she had already noticed that Samuel had a way of fading into the background. People walked past him without seeing him, but every now and then, there was something in his eyes, like he was somewhere far away, remembering a different life. The next day, the mocking returned. This time, a group of 3 were leaning against the wall near the elevators, laughing as Samuel mopped nearby. "Hey, Brooks," one of them called, pretending to trip over the mop handle. "Careful where you point that thing," the others laughed. Samuel simply stepped aside, letting them pass, but as they walked away, Emily saw a flicker in his expression. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't embarrassment. It was something deeper, something almost tired. That evening, when the office was nearly empty, Emily overheard 2 security guards talking in the lobby. One of them chuckled and said, "You know, I saw old Sam with that medal again last night." The other guard nodded. "Yeah, he's had it for years, never tells anyone why he has it, but I bet there's a story there." Emily's curiosity grew stronger. What kind of medal was it? Why did he hide it? As she packed her bag to leave, she glanced down the hall and saw Samuel again. He was wiping down a glass table, his movements slow and careful. When he noticed her watching, he gave her that same small, polite smile. And in that moment, Emily felt something she hadn't before, a quiet respect, mixed with a growing need to understand who this man really was. The laughter in the hallways might have been the same every night, but Emily was beginning to see that Samuel Brooks was not who everyone thought he was. And soon, she would learn that behind his silence was a story that could break even the coldest heart. The next few days at Goldman Towers passed like they always did. The mornings were filled with the sound of ringing phones, tapping keyboards, and rushing footsteps. The evenings were silent, except for the hum of the cleaning machines and the steady sound of Samuel's mop gliding across the floor. Emily began to notice things she hadn't before. Samuel never just cleaned. He paid attention to the people around him. When the security guard on night shift complained about his aching back, Samuel quietly brought him a small cushion the next day. When the receptionist shivered at her desk, Samuel disappeared for a moment and returned with a warm cup of tea, placing it beside her without a word. He never stayed for thanks, never waited to be noticed. He simply did what was needed and moved on. One night, Emily was in the break room, reheating a cup of instant noodles. The smell of cleaning soap drifted in as Samuel pushed his cart through the door. He glanced at her cup and frowned slightly. "That all you're eating?" he asked in a quiet voice. Emily laughed awkwardly. "It's late. And I didn't bring dinner," without saying anything more. Samuel reached into his bag and pulled out a small container. "Here," he said, setting it on the table. "It's chicken stew." Made too much, Emily hesitated, but accepted it. The stew was warm, rich, and far better than her noodles. When she looked up to thank him, he had already gone. Later that week, a janitorial worker from another floor twisted her ankle while carrying supplies. Samuel was the one who noticed her limping. He took the heavy box from her hands and told her to sit. Then, with surprising gentleness, he wrapped her ankle with a cloth from his cart. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Thank you, Samuel." He only smiled and replied, "It's nothing," before going back to work. But Emily kept seeing these moments. They weren't accidents. Samuel chose to help. Again and again, even when no one else cared. It was like kindness was part of his nature. Yet, despite all this, the mocking from some employees didn't stop. One evening, as Samuel mopped the hallway, two young men passed by, laughing and joking. One of them said, "Hey Sam, when are you going to retire that mop? Looks older than you," the other added. "Maybe he'll leave it to someone in his will." Emily felt her chest tighten in anger. She wanted to tell them off, but Samuel only shook his head slightly, as if to say, "Don't bother." That night, Emily stayed later than usual. When she finally walked out into the corridor, she found Samuel sitting on a bench near the window. The city lights reflected in the glass, and his face was calm but distant. "Do their words ever bother you?" she asked softly. Samuel turned to her with that same small smile. "I've heard worse," he said quietly. "People laugh because they don't know your story. And maybe that's for the best." His answer only deepened her curiosity. One evening, Lee accidentally dropped a stack of printed reports in the lobby. Papers scattered everywhere. Before she could even kneel down, Samuel was already there, helping her gather them up. His movements were quick, practiced, not just like someone who cleaned floors, but like someone used to acting fast under pressure. As he handed her the last sheet, she noticed his hands again, strong, scarred. In small places, the kind of marks you don't get from mopping floors. "You've worked hard all your life, haven't you?" she asked. Samuel chuckled softly, "Something like that," and moved on without explaining more. The building staff respected him in quiet ways. The security guard always waved when Samuel entered. The delivery drivers called him Sir. Even the building manager spoke to him with a tone just a little warmer than with others. Emily began to wonder if they knew something she didn't. One rainy Thursday evening, Emily stayed behind to finish her project. By the time she was done, the office was empty except for Samuel. She walked past him, planning to head home, but stopped when she saw what he was doing. Samuel was standing in the corner of the hall, carefully fixing a broken chair. It wasn't his job, but he worked on it with patience, making sure it was sturdy again. When he noticed her watching, he said, "If something is broken, you fix it. If you can." Emily wasn't sure if he was talking about the chair or something else. That night, she lay in bed thinking about Samuel's words. She had a feeling there was a deeper meaning behind them. The way he helped people, the way he never fought back against insults. The way he carried himself, it was all connected to something in his past. And Emily knew she was getting closer to finding out what that was. The kindness Samuel showed wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't demand attention, but it left a mark. On the people who experienced it, Emily could feel that mark on herself now. And though she didn't know his story yet, she could tell it was going to change the way she saw him forever. It was a Friday night at Goldman Towers. Most employees had already left for the weekend, leaving the building quiet. Outside, dark clouds rolled across the sky, and the wind howled through the streets. The air smelled of rain, and in the distance, a low rumble of thunder warned of a coming storm. Emily was still at her desk on the 12th floor, working on a report that had to be finished before Monday. The office lights flickered once, then steadied again. She could hear Samuel's cart somewhere down the hall, the soft squeak of the wheels moving closer. It was comforting in a strange way. Knowing he was there, she had gotten used to the sound of his work. It was like the quiet heartbeat of the empty building. At exactly 9:12 p.m., the fire alarm exploded into a shrill, echoing scream. Red lights flashed along the walls, casting the hallway in a harsh glow. Emily froze for a moment, her heart pounding. The sudden smell of smoke drifted in from somewhere down the corridor. Fire. She gasped, grabbing her bag and running toward the stairwell. Other late workers spilled out of their offices, confused and frightened. Panic rose quickly. People were shouting, rushing in different directions. Through the noise, Emily saw something that made her stop in her tracks. At the far end of the hall, an elderly man with a walking cane struggled to keep up with the others. His hands trembled as he gripped the railing, coughing from the smoke. And there, moving toward him, with purpose, was Samuel. His cart was abandoned, his mop left, leaning against the wall. "Come on, sir. This way," Samuel said firmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority, the kind of tone that made people listen. Emily watched as Samuel took the man's arm, guiding him toward the emergency exit. The smoke was thicker now, and the flashing lights made the scene feel unreal. Someone shouted, "Leave him. We have to go." But Samuel didn't even glance at them. "I said move, sir," he told the old man, his voice calm but commanding. The man nodded and followed, leaning heavily on Samuel for support. As they reached the stairwell, Samuel positioned himself on the side closer to the railing, using his own body as a shield. Step by step, they moved down. The smell of burning plastic filled the air, making Emily's eyes water. She hurried after them, her bag swinging at her side. In that moment, she realized Samuel's movements were deliberate, controlled, almost like someone who had trained for emergencies. Halfway down, a small crowd had gathered on one of the landing platforms. Unsure of which exit to take, the smoke was creeping in fast, and fear was spreading like wildfire. "Back this way," Samuel called out, pointing to a side door. "This exit leads directly to the street. You'll be safe there." Something in his tone cut through the panic. People listened, moving as he directed. Even the building's head of security seemed to follow his lead without question. Finally, they reached the ground floor. The night air rushed in as the side door swung open, carrying away some of the smoke. Samuel guided the old man outside, making sure he had somewhere to sit. The man's face was pale, but he was breathing. "Easier now, thank you," he whispered. Samuel simply nodded, then turned back toward the building. Emily stared at him in shock. "You're going back in?" she asked. "There are still people on the 8th floor," he replied. already heading for the stairwell. There was no hesitation in his steps, no fear in his voice. It was as if he had done this 100 times before. Minutes later, he emerged. Again, leading to more workers, one of them limping, the other coughing hard. By then, the fire department had arrived. Rushing into the building with hoses and equipment, Samuel stepped aside, letting them work, his face calm but alert. Emily noticed his shirt was damp with sweat, and there was a faint black smear of soot on his cheek. Yet he stood there quietly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. When the flames were finally brought under control, the building manager began checking names to make sure everyone was safe. People were gathered in small groups, talking about the fire. Emily overheard one of the rescued workers saying, "If it weren't for the janitor, I'd still be stuck in there." Someone else added, "He moved like a soldier." The words echoed in Emily's mind. Was that what he had been? Samuel didn't wait for praise. He went back inside with the firefighter's permission to collect his cart and mop. By the time Emily found him again, he was in the lobby, wiping soot from the floor like it was just another normal night. When she approached him, he gave her a small nod. "You all right?" he asked, as if she were the one who had been in danger. Emily didn't know what to say. She just nodded, but inside, the questions burned even hotter. Who was this man? That night, as Emily rode home in a taxi, she couldn't stop replaying the scene in her mind. The calm voice, the quick decisions. The way people followed his orders without question. This wasn't just a janitor. Samuel Brooks was something else entirely, and she was going to find out exactly what the weekend after the fire. The building was quiet, repairs were still being made, and the smell of smoke lingered faintly in the halls. When employees returned on Monday morning, the fire was the only thing anyone talked about. But more than the fire, they talked about the janitor. Some called him a lifesaver. Others whispered about the way he had moved. Calm and precise, like he had done it all before. Emily heard it all, but she wasn't satisfied with rumors. She had seen Samuel in action, the way people listened to him without hesitation, the way he had gone back into the smoke without fear, and she couldn't forget the small, shiny medal she had seen him holding weeks earlier. Now, more than ever, she needed to know what it meant. That evening, she stayed later than usual, pretending to finish her work. She waited until the office was nearly empty before walking down to the lobby. Samuel was there, pushing his cart along the marble floor. He moved with the same quiet patience as always, as if Friday night's heroics had never happened. "Samuel," she called softly. He looked up, pausing his work. "Evening." "Miss Emily," he said, nodding politely. Emily hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. I saw you during the fire," she began. "You were different. You knew exactly what to do." Samuel's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Just helping where I could," he said simply, turning back to his mop. But Emily stepped closer, her voice lowering. "And I saw that medal once. Before the fire," she said. "You were holding it, looking at it like it meant something." Samuel's hand paused mid-motion. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Finally, he straightened and looked at her, his dark eyes calm but guarded. "It's nothing," he said. "Just a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Emily pressed gently. Samuel studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether to speak. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket. His hand emerged, holding the small object she had seen before. The metal was dull with age, but the engraving was still clear, a golden star set against a silver circle. A ribbon, faded but still strong, was attached to it. Emily's breath caught. She recognized it, not from personal experience, but from history books. It was a military medal. "This," Samuel said quietly, "was given to me a long time ago, for something I wish had never needed doing." Emily looked at him in surprise. "You were in the military?" she asked. Samuel's lips curved into a faint smile. Though there was sadness in his eyes, once, he said, a lifetime ago. He turned the medal over in his palm, the medal catching the dim lobby light. It's supposed to be for bravery, he continued, but bravery doesn't feel like what they think it does. It's just doing what you can, when you have to, no matter how scared you are. Emily wanted to ask more, but she could sense the heaviness in his voice. Why? Why work here as a janitor then, after all that? She asked softly. Samuel's gaze drifted to the window, where the city lights glowed in the distance. Because life changes, he said simply, and sometimes, after the noise and chaos, you just want quiet. Before Emily could say anything else, footsteps approached from behind. It was the building manager, looking flustered. Brooks. Got a spill in the conference room, he said, barely glancing at Emily. Samuel slipped the medal back into his pocket, as smoothly as if it had never been there. On my way, he replied, pushing his cart toward the elevators. Emily stood there for a moment, her mind spinning. He had just given her a glimpse of something huge, a past that didn't fit with the quiet, humble man everyone thought they knew. But she could tell he had only shared a fraction of the truth, and now, more than ever, she wanted to know the rest. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the way Samuel had held that medal, the way his voice had changed when he spoke about bravery. Her curiosity had turned into determination. She decided she would find out more if Samuel wouldn't tell her directly. Maybe she could discover it another way. The next day, during her lunch break, she searched his name online. At first, there were too many results. Samuel Brooks wasn't exactly rare, but then she added the words medal and military. And there he was, in an old news article from over a decade ago. The headline made her eyes widen. Captain Samuel Brooks awarded Star of Valor for heroism in rescue mission. There was a photo of him, younger, in uniform, standing tall, eyes sharp. A row of medals on his chest. He looked nothing like the quiet janitor pushing a mop through the halls. The article spoke of a dangerous mission, of lives saved under impossible circumstances. It also mentioned the loss of several soldiers, names listed with solemn respect. Emily leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. She finally had proof. Samuel Brooks was not just a janitor. He was a war hero. But the article didn't explain why he had left the military, or why he was working in a corporate building now. That mystery still remained. And Emily was determined to uncover it. Emily could hardly focus on her work the rest of the day. The image of the young Captain Samuel Brooks in uniform stayed in her mind, proud, strong, and full of life. It was so different from the quiet, bent man she saw pushing a mop in the halls every night. She needed to understand what had happened between those two versions of him. The next evening, she stayed late again. By now, she knew Samuel's routine. He would start on the top floor and work his way down. Ending in the lobby, she waited until the office was almost empty before walking toward the 10th floor. She found him there, mopping near the glass conference room, the city lights glowing behind him. Samuel, she said softly. He looked up, giving his usual small smile. You're working late again, he remarked. Emily took a deep breath. I found an article about you, she said. Captain Samuel Brooks, Star of Valor. You saved a lot of people. The mop stopped moving. For a moment, Samuel didn't look at her. Then he leaned the mop against the wall and slowly walked over to the window. His reflection stared back at him, older, worn, but still carrying the shadow of the man in that photo. So, you know, he said quietly. Emily nodded. But I don't know everything. I don't know why you left, why you're here instead of anywhere else. Samuel let out a long breath, the kind that seemed to carry years of weight. It's not a story I tell often, he said. Not because I'm ashamed, but because it hurts to remember. He began speaking, his voice low but steady. Years ago, he had been a captain leading a rescue mission in a war zone. His unit had been sent to evacuate civilians trapped in a collapsed building after an airstrike. The ground was unstable, fire and smoke everywhere. They had managed to pull out more than 30 people, including children. But during the final sweep, the structure gave way. I was still inside, Samuel said, his eyes distant. 2 of my men were with me. And so was a little boy. Maybe 7 years old, they managed to get the boy to safety. But in the chaos, one of his soldiers was crushed. Samuel paused, his hands curling slightly, as if remembering the weight of debris. The other, he stayed behind to push me clear. He didn't make it. Samuel's voice grew quieter, to friends, 2 brothers, to me. Gone in minutes. Emily's chest tightened. But you saved so many. She said gently. Samuel shook his head. When you've seen enough war, you stop counting the ones you saved. You only remember the ones you couldn't. After the mission, Samuel was awarded the Star of Valor. People called him a hero, but inside he felt hollow. I went home to my wife and daughter. Thinking maybe I could leave it all behind, he said. For a moment, a faint warmth crossed his face. But it faded quickly. They were my whole world, he continued. But one night, a drunk driver ran a red light. Emily's breath caught. Samuel's voice was flat, but his eyes glistened. They were gone before I got to the hospital. The silence between them was heavy. Samuel looked down at his hands. After that, I couldn't. I couldn't wear the uniform anymore. Couldn't look at medals or awards without thinking of what I'd lost. He left the military, moved to the city, and took jobs that kept him busy but didn't require him to face crowds or questions, being a janitor. It's quiet work, he said. I see people every day, but I don't have to get too close. It's easier that way. Emily felt a lump in her throat. All the moments she had seen him help others, all the kindness he showed, it made sense now. He wasn't just doing his job. Kay was making sure no one around him was left behind, not even in small ways. Samuel. I'm sorry, she said softly. He gave her a faint smile. Life doesn't always go the way you plan. You just keep going, one step at a time. Before she could reply, the sound of voices echoed from down the hall. Some employees were leaving a late meeting, laughing loudly. One of them, one of the same, who had mocked Samuel before, glanced at him and then looked away quickly. It seemed word of the fire had changed something. There was no teasing this time, no jokes, just quiet respect. Even if they didn't say it out loud. As Samuel picked up his mop again, Emily realized she was holding back tears. She had come looking for a mystery, but she had found something far more powerful, a story of loss, resilience, and quiet strength. She knew now that Samuel Brooks was more than a hero in the past. He was still a hero every single day, even if most people never saw it. The days after Emily learned the truth about Samuel were different. Every time she saw him in the hallway, she didn't just see the quiet janitor anymore. She saw the man who had once commanded soldiers. The man who had carried strangers out of burning buildings. The man who had lost everything but still found the strength to help others. She wanted to tell everyone, but she knew Samuel valued his privacy. Still, the way some employees treated him made her blood boil. Even though the mocking had lessened since the fire, a few people still smirked or whispered when he passed. They had no idea who they were talking about. Emily decided enough was enough. If Samuel wouldn't tell his story, she would. The opportunity came during the monthly staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the large conference hall, the managers, the team leaders, even some of the night shift staff. Samuel was there too, quietly cleaning the back row before the meeting started. Emily sat near the front, her hands clenched in her lap. Her heart pounding when the floor was opened for announcements. She stood up. Before we start, she said, her voice trembling slightly, but growing stronger with each word. I think there's something everyone here should know." Heads turned toward her. In the back, Samuel froze mid-step. His mop paused against the floor. "You all know Samuel Brooks," she continued. "Some of you might have laughed at him, or ignored him, or never bothered to learn his name. But you should." There was a murmur through the room. Emily took a deep breath, because before he was the janitor here. "He was Captain Samuel Brooks of the United States Army," she said clearly. Gasps rippled across the room. "He was awarded the Star of Valor for leading a rescue mission that saved dozens of lives under enemy fire. And just days ago, during the fire in this building, he risked his life again to make sure no one was left behind." She saw Samuel's jaw tighten slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "He's not just the man who cleans these floors," Emily went on, her voice steady now. "He's a hero. And it's about time we treated him like one." For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, slowly, people began turning in their chairs to look at Samuel. Some of the same employees who had once mocked him now looked ashamed. Unable to meet his eyes, others whispered to each other, shocked. The building manager cleared his throat, clearly embarrassed. "Is this true, Brooks?" He asked, his voice softer than usual. Samuel stood still for a moment, then set his mop aside and stepped forward. "Yes," he said simply. "It's true, I served. It's true, I was given that medal. And yes, I helped during the fire. But I didn't do any of it for praise." His voice was calm, but carried a quiet weight that filled the room. "I cleaned floors. Yes, but I've also cleaned battlefields. I've seen enough pain to last a lifetime. The truth is, it doesn't matter what your job is, it matters how you do it and how you treat people." You could have heard a pin drop. Samuel's eyes swept the room, not with anger, but with something far more disarming. "Forgiveness? I've been called many things in my life," he said, "but the only title I want now is a man who does his work well and leaves this place a little better than he found it." Emily felt her throat tighten. It wasn't the dramatic speech she had expected. But somehow, it was even more powerful. Samuel didn't need to demand respect. He had already earned it. Long before this moment, the building manager stepped forward awkwardly. "On behalf of the company, Captain Brooks, thank you for your service and for what you did for all of us." A wave of applause began. Hesitant at first, then stronger. Even the ones who had laughed at him before clapped, some looking at him with teary eyes. Samuel gave a small nod, but didn't bask in the attention. It was clear he was ready to get back to work after the meeting ended. Several employees approached him. One of the young men who had made fun of him weeks ago stood there, shifting uncomfortably. I'm sorry," he said, not quite meeting Samuel's gaze. Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just remember, you don't know what someone's been through. Treat them kindly anyway." As the room emptied, Emily walked over to him. "I hope you're not angry, I told them," she said cautiously. Samuel shook his head, angry. "No, I don't like the spotlight, but maybe it was time they knew." He gave her that small, rare smile. "Thank you, Emily," that night. As Samuel wheeled his cart through the quiet halls, there was something different in the air. The security guards greeted him warmly. Employees who passed him in the hallway nodded respectfully. It wasn't pity, it was respect. And for the first time in a long time, Samuel felt like he truly belonged. The morning after the staff meeting, Samuel arrived at Goldman Towers at his usual time. The winter air was crisp, the city streets still quiet. He expected the day to be like any other quiet work. Unnoticed, unseen, but the moment he walked into the lobby, he knew something had changed. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," the receptionist said with a warm smile. She had never called him by his full name before. The security guard at the entrance gave him a respectful nod. "Morning, Captain," he added. Samuel chuckled softly. Just Samuel is fine, but he could see the change in their eyes. They weren't just seeing the janitor anymore, as He pushed his cart toward the elevators. Two young employees stepped aside to make room. One of them, a man who had once laughed at him, looked up and said, "Morning, sir." Samuel returned the greeting, his voice calm, but inside there was a small, unexpected warmth. Throughout the day, little moments kept happening. Someone held the elevator for him. A woman from accounting brought him a coffee and said, "Thank you for everything." Even the building manager stopped by to tell him the company was covering the cost of replacing his worn-out shoes and uniform, though Samuel politely declined. Saying he was fine, Emily noticed the change too. People weren't just being polite. They were starting to truly see him, and in return, Samuel's quiet smile seemed just a little more genuine. That evening, as Samuel worked on the top floor, Emily walked beside him. "I think they'll never look at you the same way again," she said. Samuel shrugged lightly. "Maybe. But respect is like trust. It's not about a single moment. It's about what you do every day." Emily smiled. "You've been earning it for years." They just didn't realize it. As they talked, an older woman approached. She worked in one of the law offices in the building and rarely stayed late, but tonight she lingered, holding a small envelope in her hands. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, "my husband served too. I just wanted to say thank you for your service and for being who you are." She handed him the envelope and left before he could open it. Inside was a simple, handwritten note. "Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Some carry mops." Samuel stood there for a moment, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. He slipped it into his pocket beside his medal, feeling the weight of both. Over the next few weeks, the building's mood seemed different. People greeted each other more. The teasing and sarcasm that once floated through the halls had quieted. It was as if Samuel's story had reminded everyone that kindness cost nothing. One snowy evening, as he finished mopping the lobby, Emily joined him. "You know," she said, "since that day, I think you've inspired more people than you realize." Samuel gave a quiet laugh. "Inspiration is overrated. Doing the right thing, that's enough for me." The two of them stepped outside together. The cold night wrapping around them, snowflakes drifted down, landing softly on the street. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, painting the ground in gold and silver. Samuel glanced up at the sky, then back at the building he had worked in for years. "I think," he said slowly, "this is the first time in a long while I feel at peace." Emily smiled at him. "You've earned it." As they stood there, the receptionist came out to lock the doors. "Good night, Mr. Brooks," she said warmly. Samuel nodded. "Good night." Then he and Emily began walking down the quiet street. He carried his work bag in one hand, and in the other, hidden from the cold, was his medal. When they reached the corner, Emily paused. "Samuel, do you ever think about going back? Not to the military, but maybe telling your story to more people?" Samuel looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe," he said, "but only if it helps someone. Otherwise, I'm fine right where I am." Emily didn't push further. She understood that for Samuel, heroism wasn't about glory. It was about living every day with integrity, no matter the job, no matter who was watching. As they parted ways, Emily glanced back. She saw Samuel walking into the snowy night, his tall figure moving with the same steady steps as always. But now she knew those steps carried a lifetime of courage and sacrifice. And she knew she would never forget the man who taught her that heroes don't always stand on battlefields. Sometimes they're right in front of you, quietly making the world a better place, one floor at a time.